It is Mother's Day, so I imagine a lot of you are out celebrating or doing something like that. Uh, and so I got to plug my computer in or it's going to die here. Darn it. Um, if you're able to join me live today, that's great. I'll keep it short anyway because we need to celebrate Mother's Day here at my house. My wonderful wife has been working very hard this year to raise our boys and help them with their schoolwork and get them to places and stuff like that. So we have a choose your own adventure day that we're doing with her. So anyway, sorry I didn't make it last week. I had every intention. I had to take care of emergency is definitely not the right word, but something came up with one of my other responsibilities, and I had to meet somebody during this time, and I had every intention of just coming back later in the afternoon or evening and putting something out for you guys, but I wasn't. Obviously, life gets in the way. I wasn't able to do that. But I am here today, and I'm curious to talk about this topic with you guys. If you're watching by replay, please feel free to put comments in the comment section. Obviously, if you're watching live, please feel free to do that as well. Again, I'm just kind of operating on the assumption that a lot of people will be busy today. I'm just making sure that I'm on. Marietta says, good morning. Good morning. Mariana says, good morning. Okay, so if you saw in the description for this Sunday Morning Live, I want to talk about what I'm going to call, just for today, the Christ impulse. The Christ impulse. What is it? What am I talking about? Why is it important? One of the things that I've really been struggling with and wrestling through for the last several months, but it really has kicked into high gear the last couple of weeks for some reason for me. Really, I guess this started for me at my last birthday, and I've got one coming up here pretty quick. So it's been almost a year that I've been wrestling and slowly thinking through and walking through some of this stuff, talking with other people about it. But it's just been more recently intensified in terms of becoming more of a focus for me in my personal life. And that is, I don't even know how to say it. I mean, that's part of the reason that it's been a struggle. It's taken so long is because I don't really know the language to put to it, except to say that, I definitely walked away from doing traditional ministry, pastoring, traditional church. I've been doing some Sunday morning lives, covered a wide swath of topics and interest. For the longest time, I was kind of one of those deconstruction guys. In other words, I would get asked to speak on podcasts and do interviews, and almost invariably the topic would come around to deconstruction, or the topic would come around to or be about deconstruction, or be about religious trauma, right? A lot of you probably found this channel through the Religious Trauma Recovery page on Facebook. And my original intention was to raise awareness and share my journey and try to help people understand how it's not just the churches or the systems or the people in the churches that are the problem, but a lot of the doctrines that we believe, a lot of the doctrines that we're taught, the way we are indoctrinated within Christianity and Christian circles is also a big part of the problem. And since it is Mother's Day, I should probably say that I think religious trauma occurs and religious oppression occurs on a whole other level for women in the church, especially if you come from any kind of a fundamentalist background, any kind of a real hard Bible believing background where they believe that women are, secondary or to be subjugated or to be submissive. Definitely not on equal par in terms, at least if not in terms of your nature, but in terms of your opportunities. And for that, I mean, like can't have any leadership in the home, or can't have any leadership in the church, or can't have any leadership in society. And then women are often sexualized in the church. Speaking hyperbolic here probably, but I would say that the church sometimes, in some instances, sexualizes women almost as much as like, say, the pornography industry or something. Because I heard so many stories about women who were raised in the church, and even being, as soon as they hit puberty and their body starts to change, they're told how they have to dress, that they can't be a stumbling block to the men or the elders in the church, really shamed sexually, etc., and so on. So I'm just bringing this up. There's nothing to do with the Christ Impulse or what I'm going to talk about necessarily, but I wanted to acknowledge that reality for those of you that are women that came out of religious trauma, or came out of the church, or structured, indoctrinated religion, and just say, I think the feminine principle is more oppressed, and it's much more difficult for women in religious circles than it is for men. So I'm just trying to acknowledge that. So that's kind of, I went down that path with religious trauma page, and then flirted with atheism for a while. I do see tremendous value in the scientific method. I do see tremendous value in science in general. I do believe that we have filters and biases and things that often prevent us from seeing objectively the facts about a situation or the truth about a situation. And so I love and appreciate all of that. And then I got into philosophy for a little bit, specifically idealism, the idea that consciousness is the primary component of reality and not necessarily matter. And so kind of unintentionally ended up in this space. And when I say space, what I mean is this place where in my life, I really let go of or abandoned a lot of my spiritual self, a lot of my former Christian self, if you will. And I still have a lot of unpacking to do in regards to religious trauma. Last week when I was out during this time, driving around, it's probably the first time in maybe years that I have been out around in our city while people are going to church on a Sunday morning, and drive by churches where, the parking lots are full, or the parking lots are half full or empty. It was such a weird experience, because that represented such a part of my life for so long. Like, Sundays were events for us. We get up, go to church, take the family out, and go out to eat with folks in the church. After fellowship, hang out, oftentimes not get home till, 3 or 4 in the evening, leave at 8 o'clock in the morning and not get home till 3 or 4. So church, Sunday mornings, it was more than just church. It was an event. And so it was really weird for me to be driving around and seeing that. And then this wave of tremendous grief just overcame me. And I realized, regardless, good, bad, and different, when something is such a powerful and important part of our lives, we're going to grieve it when it's gone. And I realized that I had not really let those emotions out, where I allowed myself to grieve the loss of something that was so important to me and such a big part of my life. And then packed in there was also this trauma, like there was kind of like a remembering of the good times, because we had a lot of good times in ministry and in our church. And I think our church was much healthier than a lot of other spaces and places. That's not to say that I did everything perfect. I certainly didn't. That's not to say that I didn't cause harm when I was in ministry. I certainly did. But it's not to say that it was all bad. And that's the problem. We have a tendency in our lives to want to paint things as either all good or all bad. Again, this dualistic categorization that I've talked about on here before. Somebody asks, when is your birthday? It's in August. My birthday's in August, the end of August, August 30th. So sorry, the comments, I haven't really been paying attention to them, and that one just came up. So we have a tendency to, bifurcate things into either or, all good or all bad sort of categories, because it's simple and it's easier for us. It's easier for our brains. And one of the things that I am really being confronted with is this reality that we were touching something. We were touching something transcendent. We were touching something numinous. By transcendent, I mean something that was beyond the realm of ordinary, everyday human experience. That we were tapping into what I would call presence. I hate to say God because it's so problematic, but for lack of a better term, the presence of God. And tapping into what I'm going to call the Christ principle, because here's my point. I do believe there is a Christ impulse or a Christ principle. And I'm using the word Christ because it's something that we can relate to in the West, and I don't know what else to call it. But I would say that this impulse, this principle, this energy, this divine spark that is Christ, or that is Christ consciousness, has two primary components. The first component is for connection. We can call it love. But again, love's one of those words that can mean anything or mean nothing, depending on how you hear it. So it's this impulse for connection with other human beings, and not just human beings, but other sentient beings. I think that impulse to have connection with animals, or with our pets, or with the animal kingdom, or with nature in general, or with art and beauty, but it's this transcendent feeling where I feel connected. I feel connected to myself in a healthy way. I feel connected to the people in my life in a healthy way. I feel connected and grounded with the earth, with my life, with the flow of time, all of that kind of stuff. So the first component of what I'm calling the Christ impulse is that connection. And we can experience this anywhere and everywhere at any time. This isn't something that has a doctrine to it. This isn't something that has a belief system. You don't have to sign a, church membership statement or a doctrinal statement that, yes, I believe these things. And by believing these things, this qualifies me to experience this level of connection. And so connection to the divine, connection to the transcendent, you get it. Again, you might call it love, but you might call it loving connection, but I would just say connection, make it really simple. And then the second principle, the second major component of what I'm calling the Christ impulse or the Christ principle is freedom. So connection and freedom, and being able to balance the two. So freedom to be able to express your unique and authentic self without having to be homogenized into a group, without having to have your uniqueness swallowed up in a group, and to have the freedom to, I want to say, live life your way, but to pursue your bliss, to find your happiness, to to experience the pleasure principle in life. So yes, I would say the pleasure principle is very much part of this Christ impulse or this Christ consciousness. So if I were going to define Christ consciousness, I would say that it's about connection and it's about freedom and it's about finding the balance between those two principles and walking that out, being able to walk that out in our lives. Now, and why are you emphasizing freedom? Because like from the very beginning, one of my life verses, if you will, the snapshot that I had of the person Jesus that I related to as a believer was found in the Gospel of Luke, Luke chapter 4, verse, I think it's 18, Luke 4:18. And Jesus says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me." The word anointed there is christened. So it has to do with Christ or the Christ principle. He has christened me. He has anointed me to preach the gospel or preach good news to the poor. So breaking the bondage of poverty, right? If we're in poverty, we're not going to have the freedom to be able to do some of the things we want to do. So preaching good news to the poor, healing the brokenhearted. Certainly if we're depressed, if we're heartbroken, if we're not mentally and emotionally healthy, that's going to create limitations and bondages, and we're not going to be able to find connection or freedom if we're brokenhearted. So gospel of the poor, heal the brokenhearted, deliverance to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised or oppressed, and to preach the year of Jubilee, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. So Jesus defining his own ministry is one of giving out or connecting with other people to this anointing, to this Christ consciousness, to this Christ principle in such a way that it banishes and removes the obstacles and the barriers from our lives that prevent us from being able to have connection and freedom. So in other words, it breaks bondages, it brings healing, it brings transformation, it brings hope. And in each situation, there is improvement, right? And so I would say that there is something transcendent, there is something numinous, there's something, dare I say, divine, something built into the fabric of the universe, however you want to understand it, however you want to think about it, whatever kind of language you want to use to describe or to name it, to name this thing. But it's this, it is a moving principle. That's why I keep wanting to say impulse. It is an impulse and an energy that moves or sustains us towards connection and freedom. And when we tap into that, when we experience that, whether we experience that with a friend, whether we experience that with art, like I said, I can think of a few times going to being at rock concerts, and the whole group, the whole crowd is just caught up together with the performers in this experience, and there's bliss there, right? That's the Christ impulse that I'm speaking about. And then certainly it can be involved with other types of more traditionally thought of supernatural encounters, dreams, visions, prophecy, healing, miracles, things of that nature can also come from the Christ impulse now, or the Christ consciousness. So if the Christ consciousness, if I'm correct, and the Christ consciousness is about connection, and it is about freedom, and specifically freedom to express your own unique authenticity, then what we can see is that by and large, at least what we see publicly, what the average person in America, let's say, is able to see publicly from the Christian community right now, we can see that a lot of what comes from the Christian community not only does not have the Christ impulse or the Christ consciousness within it, but it is actually oppositional to that principle. It is a power that resists or works against. It's quite literally anti-Christ. So that a lot of places where they're preaching the Bible today, where they're preaching and talking about Jesus, where they're gathering together in the Lord's name, and there he is in the midst of them, right? We used to love to quote that, where, especially at home groups, right? Where there's 2 or 3 gathered together, there he is in the midst of us, right? But there are whole gatherings and thunderings and preachings from pulpits that are completely antichrist, because there is an antichrist principle that pushes against and resists the Christ consciousness, that resists the Christ impulse, or that resists the Christ principle. Again, I'm kind of struggling with the language here, but let's think about this. Connection. Is the Christian church, and I'm speaking specifically of the evangelical, charismatic, Christian nationalist church, that movement that I came from, but I was not just in that echo chamber. I fellowshipped and spoke at all kinds of different churches and with different groups, and fellowship with different people. And as a general rule, there's sort of this thing where we have to be homogenous. We have to be homogenized. We all have to kind of look the same. We all have to believe the same. If we ask certain questions, then we are viewed, just the question themselves, or us for asking the question, we are viewed as a threat to the community, or as a threat to the group, or as a threat to the faith. And then we are seen as evil, right? Because we didn't conform, because we didn't check all the boxes, because we challenged the group think, but just simply by asking a question. And the way people will, and it's so funny, because the Christian faith is supposed to be about forgiveness. It's supposed to be about second chances. It's supposed to be about grace. I mean, if there's one thing that we were taught, or taught over and over again from the scriptures, it's about forgiveness, right? It's about, we're not perfect human beings. We're going to have times in our life that are not going to be our best moments, and we are going to hurt other people. We're going to do things that are going to hurt people, that's going to hurt ourselves. And we're also should be in this space where we can learn and grow. And so we are taught to, and again in the scriptures, to extend mercy, to extend grace. But I didn't really experience that, and didn't really see that much in the church, particularly when I had my own problems, and I have had my own issues and things that I was working through, and trying to open up to people about that. And then there's just no redemption there. There's just no grace there whatsoever. People will just cut you off. They'll gossip about you. They'll get together for the express purpose of gossiping just about you. They won't ignore you. They'll give you send you hateful letters and texts. They'll give you hateful looks, and yet the entire time somehow believe that they are participating in the Christ movement, or in the Jesus movement, or somehow accurately reflecting and representing the nature and the spirit and the consciousness of Christ. And nothing could be further from the truth. It's actually anti-Christ. So when we're thundering against people, I mean, quite frankly, the LGBTQ plus TIA, Two-Spirit community is probably the best example of this, because the best example of the Christ principle in operation. And the reason I'm going to say that, and I know I'm wading into a place that needs to have a lot of conversation and needs to have a lot of nuance. I definitely have strong feelings and opinions about HRT and gender transitioning, and especially as it involves our children. But setting aside the nuances, setting aside the emotional charges on both sides of this issue, because I also understand the tremendous persecution and hatred that this group receives for not homogenizing with what at least Christian society considers to be the norm. So I'm very sensitive to that, very compassionate towards that. And that's probably one of the best examples of the Christ principle that I can come up with, because there is connection in these relationships, right? There is connection within that community, and there is diversity within that community. That's why the letters keep growing over time, to be more inclusive of various different types of sexual orientation and gender expression. So so there's connection there. And then there's also freedom. Don't have to be bound by the rules of marriage is only between one woman and one man, which would be a fun myth to debunk. I did this several years ago where I talked about the biblical model of marriage. And it's fun to just dig in there and explore that. But having the freedom, you see what I'm saying? Having the freedom to find that connection within a context that you find pleasurable, within a context that you find erotic or arousing, and it doesn't necessarily fit with any of the, definitely not with the Christian or Catholic societal norms, right? So there's that freedom and connection. So therefore, I would say that principle that is in the universe that I do believe is moving us into evolving into a better space and a better place is much more expressed within the LGBTQ community than it is within the Christian community. So what happens is, because we use the term Christ, because I'm using the term Christ, it's very, very easy then. That's why I said the language here is difficult for me, because it's very easy to conflate whatever version of Jesus someone believes in with this principle, or it's easy to conflate the religion, Christianity, Christ, with this principle when the two don't necessarily have anything to do with each other. Now, certainly, can you go to churches and find connection? Can you find churches that are affirming of diversity, that are affirming of sexuality, and that are sex positive? Absolutely. Can you find churches where there is that connection in that community, and where people are being taught and ministered to in such a way that they're being empowered to find their freedom? Absolutely. And in those cases, and in those churches, and in those ministries, then that Christ impulse is operating and moving and working very powerfully. But when you have the opposite of that, us and them kind of a mentality, we're on the side of righteousness. We're the sons of light, and they are the sons of whoever it is, whether it's the LGBTQ community, or whether it's the Democratic Party, or whether it's liberals, or whether it's communists, or whether it's Muslims, or whether it's whoever it is, right? They're the enemy, and then they become the scapegoat. They become the scapegoat principle. If we would just, get rid of this community, or get this community to live right or do right, then all our problems in the world would be solved. And so all the angst that we have of life gets projected onto the other. That's the Antichrist principle. Telling people what they should do with their own bodies, depriving women of their right to have autonomy over their own pregnancies, regardless of the circumstances. These are things that are violating the Christ principle, or violating the Christ impulse. Okay, so I think I've made that abundantly clear. So now let's bring this full circle, and then I'm going to go ahead and end this show because again, it is Mother's Day and have stuff to do. But so coming full circle would be thinking about recovering, restoring. In other words, looking at what were the positive, what was the precious metal and what was the dross? Because if there wasn't precious metal, if we're honest with ourselves, if there wasn't precious metal, and I'm speaking metaphorically, if there was not something that brought value to our lives when we were part of Christianity and when we were in the church, and I realized that some people were just indoctrinated and you had it your whole life and there really wasn't much choice there. But for a lot of us, there was choice. And for a lot of us, there was something that brought value to our lives. And being able to rescue that silver or that gold or that precious metal from all the dross. So for me, the precious metal is this Christ impulse. It is this Christ consciousness. And it is those times when we had those experiences of connection and empowerment and freedom that we were experiencing God, that we were experiencing the divine, that we were experiencing goodness, whatever you want to call it, source energy, whatever you want to call it. And being able to recover that, redeem that, and reintegrate that into myself and reintegrate that into my life, reintegrate that back into some of the stuff that I'm doing as acts of service for other people. That's where I'm at in the journey right now. Now I realize this, and I want you to understand this thing is a journey. Some people need to, for their own growth, for their own experience of the Christ principle, they need to go full on into atheism. They need to rage against the machine. The machine in this case being the religious system, the indoctrination. They need to like completely extract themselves from that, at least for a season, maybe forever, but maybe it's just for a season. Other people, they were just able to, separate what for them was the precious metal from the dross without completely extracting themselves from the system. I needed to, for a season, get that stuff out and get away because I was so indoctrinated, because I didn't know who I was. It was like getting out of a toxic relationship, like getting out of a toxic narcissistic relationship where you're not allowed to think for yourself or set boundaries or make decisions and without being gaslit, right? And so you become so programmed by the other person to be the robot that they want you to be, that when you leave the relationship, you don't really know who you are as an authentic person. And so you have to go out and you have to experiment and you have to try things and you have to maybe get therapy and maybe find community of people that will support you for who you are. So there was definitely a season where I had to, process so much of that stuff and walk through so much of that stuff. But then I realized at the same time, I'm denying this other spiritual, mystical, prophetic aspect of myself. And so for me, it's time to recover that. For me, it's time to figure out how to reintegrate that into my life. So just wanted to come on, share very openly, very honestly, very transparently, wondering if anybody else is in the same sort of space there with that. Hey, Chad, good to see you jumping on, man. Thanks for commenting. So if you're watching this later, because again, I realize I haven't been as consistent on Sunday mornings. That always hurts your algorithms and whatever. But also, it is Mother's Day. Um, so let me know. Let me know in the comments what you think. Thank you for watching this. If you appreciate the work that I'm doing, if you want to help us so that I can produce more content, I was able to produce a lot more content uh, last summer because I've got more free time during the summer. So I hopefully will get back to doing that. Also had more resources to be able to pay someone to help me, which I don't have anymore. So it's back to a one-person operation. But if you want to sign up, the PayPal link is in the description. It's paypal.me/New Day Global. And that money goes to our organization and helps us to create more content and stuff. So appreciate everybody that's donated. You can sign up and do monthly donations. You can do one-time donation. Doesn't have to be large, although large donations would certainly be helpful. But I'm keeping all my content for free. Don't have a Patreon page, at least not yet. Don't have a paywall. Nothing that I'm doing is behind a paywall right now. That may change in the future. So if you appreciate the fact that it's free, please consider donating to us. Otherwise, I hope if you're watching this, you have a very blessed Mother's Day. If it's a difficult day for you because either you did not have children or your mother, like mine, has left this earth and left this life, then may you find comfort and peace, and may the Christ principle be very manifest in your life and personage today. Thank you for watching.